would be so kind as thank you for starting the recording. Hi there, I'm Cynthia Call of Bedford, Pennsylvania in the SCA. I'm known as Jacintha Shopwife. I live in Ethelmark. Welcome to my discussion of Viking Age cooking vessels. You might have noticed that this did start out titled as Adventures with Viking Age Cooking Vessels, but I decided with everything that went wrong to retitle it to Misadventures with Viking Age Cooking Vessels. Please bear with me. I am analytical and tend towards dry scientific fact. I come from 32 years in laboratory science at the National Cancer Institute, part of the NIH. Starting in September of 2024, my husband and I took a graduate certificate in experimental archaeology and material culture through University College Dublin. We had to complete an experimental archaeology project during our final trimester of the year. I chose to try to compare Viking Age cooking vessels as my project because my husband and I are Viking Age historical interpreters in the United States. I wanted to get hands-on learning about cooking during this period. I was able to complete a couple of trials after some pre-cooking for my graduate certificate. So many things went wrong. I'm actually kind of amazed I earned my certificate. Fortunately, it was more about learning the process of experimental archaeology and not about the end product. And what I've learned so far makes me realize these were preliminary experiments. I've learned a lot, and the major thing I learned is I've got a lot more learning to do to cook like a Viking Age Scandinavian might have. As with most things, the more we learn, we understand how little we actually know. We learn from mistakes. Documenting mistakes in research allows others to not make the same mistakes. Then they are able to move the research forward. That may entirely flip a paradigm, a gospel truth in the field. My boss, Dr. Hager, the branch chief, was so excited when a new paper refuted the paradigm that he had established. His field of research had now advanced. My husband and I talk about this in every experimental archaeology lecture we give. Just a note that these pictures in this PowerPoint contain me in modern clothing, since this is a modification of my PowerPoint for my coursework. Please do stop to ask me questions as we go along. Go ahead and unmute yourself and interrupt me because I won't be able to see questions in the chat since I haven't figured that out. Now I got to figure out how to put my PowerPoint forward. All right, are we on the next slide? Research and preliminary experiments. Yes, okay, excellent. I have one screen, so I'm kind of flipping back and forth. Before one can cook, one must find a period recipe, then source ingredients, and I needed to figure out how one would cook this modernly to have a baseline. Based on a conversation in the KEXA, which is the Culinary Experimental Archaeology and History Discord server with Daniel Serra, I decided to make the Traveler's Porridge from an Early Meal by Serra and Thunberg. This recipe is based on archaeological finds from Viking Age Hedeby. Barley was the major grain and rye more common than the other grains that were found. The broad bean was also well represented. Animal remains were dominated by pig, 2-to-1 to cattle. Less than 10% are sheep and goats. Seabirds were hunted, but there were also domesticated fowl, chicken, and geese. This recipe uses those common finds, pork and barley. I noticed a lot of recipes in the book have leeks. Leeks aren't very common in my part of the United States. They are in the onion and garlic family, so I will be substituting a sweet onion for them. For smoked pork, I'll be using chunks of ham. When I started this project, my only experience with barley was in beef and barley soup, so I definitely did some research. The grocery store variety you buy normally expands and goes to mush in homemade soup. The box says quick. What does that mean? How does one cook barley that's a whole grain? I had no clue. I started asking questions and searching the internet, and it turns out pre-soaking barley helps it cook faster. So I tried some things. I decided to try this in a controlled situation first on my own stovetop with a regular modern pot because I was actually a bit nervous about cooking a grain I'd never really cooked with. Barley is one of the oldest domesticated grains with archaeological evidence of use from the Neolithic people in Fennoscandia, meaning Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland in 4000 BCE. Modernly, they're trying to figure out the travel path of it around the world, analyzing old seed stock remains genetically. Barley comes in a bunch of varieties. Wild barley has a two-rowed ear, while cultivated barley developed into six-rowed. Wild barley has a winter growth habit, needing exposure to a prolonged period of cold to promote subsequent flowering. A spring growth habit occurs when plants complete their growth during a single season. It can be hulled, meaning with an inedible husk, or naked, when the husk falls off by itself. The Scandinavian group of barley is largely six-rowed, entirely hulled, and predominantly spring growth habit, but they do contain a mixture of daylight responsive and non-responsive forms. I obtained hulled barley, which is a mouthful, because I didn't want to have to figure out how to dehull it. Dehulled barley may also be called a barley groat. The word groat also can describe other grains ready to cook. It's a whole grain. Barley can also be processed to remove the next layer, the bran. It's whiter in color when you do that, hence the name pearled. It can be pre-cooked and mashed and re-dried. That's the quick barley we find in the stores. Most barley available in my local grocery stores are a form of quick barley. No wonder it turns to mush in your homemade soup. I did recently discover that the Goya brand barley in bags is only pearled and will work in soup and not swell and disintegrate. Of course, all this processing is inappropriate for my experiments. So I tried pre-soaking of the barley to expedite the cooking time. I tried cooking, as I said, in a more controlled environment, also known as my kitchen stove, a more familiar milieu, before I tried cooking over an open fire. The suggested modern cook time of 30 minutes was tried to establish a baseline. Another session of cooking pre-soaked barley allowed me to try a longer cooking time. 30 minutes seemed done, but not quite porridge. Longer, of course, yielded a softer grain. So how does one test for doneness? I tried smashing it, as you can see, and I also tried mouthfeel or eating it to determine completeness of cooking. Another session, shown on the right, was done with unsoaked barley, but I got distracted and ended up cooking it for an hour and 47 minutes. Surprisingly, it didn't burn. All these preliminaries are to allow me to try to get comfortable cooking barley so I can actually focus on the cooking vessels. Any questions on the preliminaries that I did? All right, we will move on. So I proceeded into my trial one to compare a soapstone, a ceramic, and a metal pot. Trivets were used based on discussion with reenactors in our graduate certificate course. It might be easier to keep hot coals under the pots. They'd have a uniform height above the coals, and shoveling coals under should be simpler. Ham was boiled the night before in water for the broth for the porridge. A sweet onion was chopped and fried in 6 tablespoons of butter to equal 2 tablespoons per pot, based on the traveler's porridge recipe. The barley was pre-soaked. At the last minute, I realized I hadn't prepared the cookware, so I used linseed oil and put it all over the soapstone in the ceramic vessels and left it overnight. A keyhole style hearth was made to keep the fire in. I had a great deal of help from my husband, Ken Call, to create the fire pit. The lower side fits my 3 pots. That allows me to drag the coals downhill to the cooking area. We started with a teepee style fire starting situation to get the fire going. Unfortunately, the logs I had were damp from being in the woods. They'd been cut up from deadfalls the day before. They were placed adjacent to the fire in the pit to start to dry out. Here again, my husband Ken was a huge help. He did all the chainsaw work to get me usable lengths of wood. Obviously, during the Viking Age, an axe would have been used for firewood rather than a chainsaw. It would have been much more difficult to get firewood. That said, I'd like to point out that it would have been the norm. Our modern bias is in play since we know a chainsaw makes this work much easier. Lots of smaller twigs were
Already.
used. Pardon?
Sorry. I was trying to catch you in the middle of a sentence, or not in the middle of a sentence. I was wondering if the any of those bricks are fire bricks or if they're just regular cinder.
The back of the keyhole hearth was actually just regular old cinder blocks, and the front were just bricks that I had, so they are not fire bricks. May I ask why you asked that question?
Well, if you're making a fire and you're using like if the fire, gets the bricks too hot and they're not fire bricks, then they could explode them or whatever. So I was curious if that worked fine or if you needed to get a special brick.
Um, I was not aware of that, so I am extremely fortunate because that didn't happen. So, good to know. I am going to be addressing that in my future directions too. Thank you for letting me know that. Okay, so lots of smaller twigs were used to get and keep the bigger pieces of wood going and keep it hot to create the coals for cooking. After about an hour and a half, I was getting anxious about getting started. I had started around 7 a.m. It was already getting hot out. Remember, this is July, even in the shade. I found out later that around 2 hours is completely normal to start having coals, per discussion with Nicholas Biden, a UCD course mate from Australia in the SCA known as LOCAC. This led me to the conclusion that keeping the fire going was likely in the Viking Age by banking coals at night or in periods of low usage. As you can see, I used my cheater commercial charcoal to build a fire in the lower part of my hearth. It relatively quickly turned to coals. I was able to plant my trivets and pots in a nice bed of coals. I was finally able to get my porridge started. I had pre-soaked the barley to make the cooking quicker. I used 3 measures of barley and water. They were rinsed and soaked at room temperature overnight, one for each pot. Each measure of barley was placed in a pot. Lids were placed on the ceramic and soapstone. I had no lid for the metal pot. The pots were purchased to be of similar size, about 2.5 quarts or liters, and being an example of a cooking vessel used during the Viking Age. Tinned copper pot Tinned copper was used for the metal pot because I had no access to an iron or bronze copper alloy pot. Unfortunately, making do with what one has. The chopped, cooked onion and barley was added. The ham broth was added in equal parts to each pot. Leeks were used in the recipe as being found in the archaeological record. Sweet onion is in the allium family and was selected as an available substitute. I used commercial butter to saute it. I possibly could have tried to make butter from heavy cream. Cattle of the time may have been different, thus milk and butter may be different as well. As mentioned, hulled barley was purchased through the web. Hulled barley is a whole grain with just the hull removed. The ham broth was from boiling the ham in water. The ham was selected as a type of smoked pork as found in the archaeological record. It was frozen leftovers from a prior meal with a massive spiral sliced ham. There have been multiple meals made from that ham. Once the room temperature ingredients were added to the vessels, they were each placed on their trivets in rapid succession. The ham was chopped up for its later addition. Of course, our modern hams are bigger and was probably sweeter as well. The soapstone left and the ceramic right started boiling relatively quickly. It seems that keeping a lid on is helpful to keep heat inside the vessel. While lid-seated rims are mentioned for the pottery in the Anglo-Scandinavian period in York, finds of lids aren't mentioned by the archaeologist, Mainman. Were lids used? Based on the rims and this experience, I would suggest that some kind of lid was used. Mouthfeel or tasting it for texture in my mouth was selected as a method to determine if the barley was done. I could smash it as I had in prior testing, but I decided it was more time efficient to simply taste it. Once done, these recipes indicate to add the ham and eat. Porridge generally has the grain dissolving. These porridges I've made are more like a grain side dish in that the grain still seems whole. The grain is cooked sufficiently in the soapstone and ceramic, and I'm calling them done. The metal pot hasn't boiled well. It appears it's too far from the fire. It was placed directly on the coals at that time to get it heated. So I'm going to cook the grain more in the soapstone and ceramic and get the metal pot done as well. I believe the lack of a lid is a detriment, or perhaps the heat is leaving the vessel more quickly through the metal. There's not much material there to hold the heat in this pot, like in the soapstone or the ceramic pots. The ceramic and soapstone pots reheated quickly after adding more water. I really like the soapstone for its flat bottom, straight-sided shape. This is not the normal shape of vessels in the Viking Age Scandinavia. The rounded bottom of a ceramic is more difficult to balance on the trivet. I would think a flat bottom ceramic pot would be easier to throw, but the rounded form of the ceramic would allow more contact with the heat if it's in the coals. I recently saw a video on Castle Gatelon, and the potter had added a rounded bottom to a thrown pot. It was mentioned that this allowed more surface area to heat, and it's a more even heat without the corners. While the barley in the metal pot has boiled some, it's not as soft as the other pots. Since I was a hot, sweaty mess about 4 hours later, I decided that the food is done enough. The fire was doused thoroughly. According to my Fitbit, I had burned a normal day's calories in those 4 hours cooking one meal. I had barley for lunch. It was overly buttery, very butter flavored for my modern taste. The fact that I burned my day's calories by noon indicates to me that those calories and the luscious butter taste would probably have been enjoyed back in Scandinavian Viking Age. Some initial conclusions. Soapstone's heat retention may keep the food cooking, potentially using less fuel. Ceramic also heats well and holds it. Metal pots require different handling directly in the fire to get and stay hot. I've seen it used most over a direct flame in reenactment situations rather than over coals, and that's likely to be because of its heat transfer properties. I've not seen any evidence of trivets during the Viking Age. I thought it might be helpful, especially in keeping things cleaner. I thought it would have been easier to put coals under the trivets rather than moving pots to get coals under them. Since Mainman in 1990 mentions lid-seated rims, and it appears to help food cook more quickly, they may have been used in York during the Viking Age for ceramic pots. Soapstone heats quickly and holds that heat well. Ceramic also has good heat retention, supporting the change in Anglo-Scandinavian period in York, England, from soapstone to ceramic. Ceramic pots were more available and relatively efficient. The trade route from Torksey was much smaller than importing soapstone from northern Norway. Blinkhorn mentions the Scandinavians probably didn't want to create otherness and so would have used a local product rather than a Scandinavian one. I learned coals take time to develop. One should allow at least a couple of hours to get hot coals developed from wood. I believe coals would have been banked overnight. I need to learn fire management skills. Questions before we move on?
How do you know that the soapstone is more efficient?
I felt it was more efficient because it seemed to hold the heat better than the other two vessels, and that's what I'm calling more efficient.
Okay, one thing in a future study might be to have the soapstone and the ceramic be the same shape. It might be that the shape is making one work better than the other, and not necessarily. I agree with you, by the way. I think the soapstone is more efficient, but one way to more guarantee it is to make sure that the shape of the pots are the same.
That is an excellent point. So initially, my goal was to create a rounded bottom soapstone pot to test, because that is part of the experimental archaeology is actually, I wanted to actually make
Yeah,
the product I was using. Unfortunately, that did not happen, so I had to obtain a commercially available one. And I did not find one when I was looking that I could afford. This was one I could afford.
yeah.
So,
So
yeah,
I would just couch your conclusions then, saying that it is not the most efficient, and soapstone is probably the most efficient based upon what you have done. And then I'm sure that in your conclusions in your paper, you had a future work, and that anything you could not do, just throw into future work. Future work, make sure that they're the same shape.
that is an excellent point. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, though. This is very interesting so far. I should be quiet and let you continue.
Not a
I, I
problem at
have a
all.
I have a question.
Yes.
On your little list here, I don't even know if you got to it yet, but it says trivets probably weren't used. Did you find vessels that had the little feet?
Not from the Viking Age, no.
Okay.
I did not find the one. The ones used in York, England, the predominant style were a conical, not a quite conical, a rounded bottom ceramic pottery. So, and no, they did not have those little feet like what are they called? The little pots with the feet. There's a name for them. Um, those weren't available in Anglo-Scandinavian York.
Those are called pipkins.
Thank you. I knew there was a word for it. Any more? All right. Thank you all for bearing with me. All right, trial 2 plan is very similar to make porridge, but to place the pots directly in the fire on my coals. All right, this fire was started this time at 7:40 in the morning. I cheated again and used charcoal. Since the point of the experiment is to compare the vessels, how the coals aren't made shouldn't be a variable, though I think I want to address this in future experiments. Ken is busy tending the fire to make me more coals. You can see his feet on the right. By 9 a.m., I had decided it takes more than one person to cook, one to tend the fire and the other to attend the actual prep work and cooking. I had prepped pretty much everything in advance, so that was minimal, but removing lids, stirring, and rotating pots is almost a full-time job. I would think, based on this experience, that multiple pots probably weren't the norm for Viking Age cooking. Maybe with one pot going, one could also attend the fire, with wood being easily accessible to the cook. Perhaps the cooking was done more like using a crock pot and everything was in one pot, added and left to cook. The coals are almost too hot. As you can see on the left in the ceramic pot, my porridges are burning above the food line. The porridge cooked more quickly, so you can see the ham was already added by this point. The burn above the food line is like the fines in Chantran's 2021 paper, boiled, fried, or roasted. Hers was a frying residue that burnt like that. Mine is a boiling process, but my process has a lot of fat from the onions that I pre-cooked. I only used about half the butter that I used before, and the added ham is also quite fatty. In the soapstone pot, one doesn't observe burning, but you can see barley stuck to the pot. You can see some crust above the food line in the metal pot as well. In the colonial period in the United States, hearth cooking temperatures are noted as 3 heats, low, medium, and high, according to Goldenson. Since I had burning in direct coals, management of where to place the vessel is also important and is a skill I haven't had enough experience to acquire. By the way, I'm using that book as a resource since I've not found other books with fire management skills. Indeed, it is hot in front of the fire at almost 104 Fahrenheit. The humidity is also much lower at the fire at 30%. I guess the heat and burning dries it out. Over at my table, it's 72 Fahrenheit and 71% humidity. A typical July day in the shade in southern Pennsylvania. In this cooking session, I had to keep adding water as needed to keep the consistency wet. I went through about 2 quarts, almost 2 liters of added water. This time it was more like porridge. Last time it was still more like a grain, but I didn't add as much liquid to allow it to become porridge. Merriam-Webster defines porridge as a soft food made by boiling meal of grains or legumes in water or milk until thick. That leaves a lot of wiggle room. But the thing I didn't catch before was the milled part. Did you notice that I said a boiling meal of grains? Maybe you all knew the proper definition of porridge, but I didn't. So that is going to need to be addressed in future sessions. After taking out the barley, there's definitely residue left in the pots. It looks like the soapstone did burn around the outer edges. I think as I was stirring, I got most of the bits being stuck to the bottom, but I obviously didn't get into the corners. The ceramic really burnt. Must have been the ham and butter for the onions. The metal pot seems to have some more well-cooked stuff stuck to the sides, but nothing seemed to have burnt on. I thought it might be interesting to record the bottoms of the pots. This is a documentation of use wear marks. Use wear marks are a common observation of archaeological material culture. You can see where I rotated the pots on the coals, and the ash extends further up the side on the ceramic pot, indicating charcoal contact with more of the vessel. It is difficult, if not impossible, to manage both attending the fire and the cook pots, keeping things stirred. This leads me to believe there may have been a team of cooks, whether that team was two or more. I noticed this also while attending a cooking expedition at James Madison's Montpelier in Virginia. There were a couple of gentlemen that tended the fire, moved the coals, the large cast iron pots about as needed, while other people mixed and poured in the more traditional part of cooking. It was agreed among attendees and our leader that cooking for the Madisons was indeed likely to be a team of enslaved persons to keep the process smooth. Multiple pots probably weren't the norm during the Viking Age. There was too much going on to attend multiple pots. Direct heat cooks more quickly. It seems the total time may have been similar, but the second batch had progressed more towards porridge than the first. Vessels are mobile and can be moved somewhat off the coals to reduce the heat, as indicated in my colonial cookbook. Lower and slower seems to be the way to go. I still have lots to learn about fire management, coals, and placement of cooking vessels to cook well in a historic manner. Ceramic pots leach minerals and add flavor to the porridge. I noticed a tang to the porridge from the ceramic pot that I liked. I wish there was a way to determine what was being leached into the food. It reminded me of copper, but I can't say for sure. Soapstone seems to act like a crock pot and didn't burn. The tinned copper also didn't burn. Could that be because of the double layer of metal? Questions before we move on?
Did you have any, did you preheat any of your vessels before putting them directly on the coals?
I did not. I did not. Is that something you've read about or know about?
Yeah, I took the Cooking with Pipkins class from Glenn at West Coast Culinary this year, and he was pretty adamant about making sure, especially ceramic pots, that you preheat them because they can tink on you, and you don't want that, especially when you're paying a fortune for a pot. So
Right.
I just was wondering, especially that clay one, if you had preheated it and if it was fine. Um,
The instructions that came with it did not mention preheating it or anything, so I did not.
I've had ceramic pots break on me that weren't preheated, but what you do is you just start on the edge of the fire and slowly walk them in. Takes 5 to 10 minutes. And once I started doing that, I haven't had any ceramic breakage.
Okay. Thank you. That'll be very useful in my future cooking because I sure don't want to break it. Anybody else at the moment?
Just a comment that you may find your burn marks are where your pots were touching a coal or where there was flame or there's a hot spot. That's one thing I've noticed with especially baking in ceramic pots, that you have to have just a thin layer of ash and then the hot stuff on the outside. Otherwise, you get direct heat transmittal.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think it, sorry.
these burn marks seem to be very high in the pot, so um but that is good. I'm writing notes. Thank you. Direct um contact. Okay. Thank you. Honor.
Yes, I have l- been looking at illustrations of cooking scenes from all over Europe, and it is amazing how many wooden lids there are, which would not necessarily show up in the archaeological records as easily because for so
Absolutely.
long they were only looking for metal and stone and ceramic.
How are you able to determine that they are wood and not another material, if I may ask?
Well, mostly the clumsiness of the handles, because a ceramic handle is not going to have that chopped it out and pegged it in look that you get from a wooden handle on a wooden lid.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And just back for half a second to the char marks above the food line.
Yes,
The liquids in the pot will keep the pot cooler. So you
yes.
can get hotter surface, even on your modern stove and a modern pot, above the cook line, which can create a char line. Because the water isn't there to keep pulling the temperature out higher up.
I got you. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So again, that means that ceramic pot was probably too hot as well. All right. Excellent. I really appreciate this feedback. Burn marks. Too hot. Some. All right. All right. So where do I go from here? Aside from what y'all have suggested, there's lots more to do, and I haven't had time to move forward with the project, so I will have to have future sessions. I would like to compare charcoal with accelerant to wood charcoal from logs. I'd like to try a suggested log setup from Goldenson's book. You basically use logs as andirons and stack logs across them. But again, I have to have the time to wait for the coals to develop. I
You
was
might
able to,
you might
pardon?
want to try stones or bricks instead. That's what we usually do, is we put the bricks or the stones where we know we're going to want them, build the fire, and then you move the coals between the bricks and then put the pot on top of that.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
You'll also want to make sure those bricks are very dry
Okay.
because it is the steam, it's the moisture in the bricks or the concrete that usually causes problems.
That's one
Yeah.
of the reasons why using rounded river stones is so insanely dangerous, because they are almost certain to have some absorbed moisture after years in the river.
Oh my goodness. I did not realize what I was getting myself into here. Thank you so much for that
Now,
feedback. Because if I had, what did I do? If I had had that break on me, I might have like screamed and given up.
okay, now also keep in mind the difference between an inch to 2 inches and 5 inches is a huge temperature gap on the side and even faster change underneath.
Okay.
And once your heat source ends, you start to cool really quickly. I do glass beads with charcoal. And it was a bad weather day and we had an event. So we put a nylon tarp over us. We had one tiny hole after 2 full days because it was more than 4 feet and nothing was staying hot that long.
Wow. Okay.
So proximity, huge.
Proximity. I'm literally writing that down. Proximity, huge.
Do
Um,
you have a specific hypothesis or research objectives? I only asking this because I work with a lot of thesis students. And so I was just wondering if you had a specific thesis you're trying to prove or disprove with your experiment.
Um, so in this case it was more experiential, but I am slowly moving towards that. Um, so when we do our experimental archaeology lecture, I use as an example the fact that this gentleman named Slade Nakoff had done a reproduction of Lord Dunmore, who was the governor around of Virginia around the American Revolution period. He did a reproduction of a portrait by Joshua Reynolds, and he remade all the clothing that Lord Dunmore was wearing in the portrait. And as part of the experimental archaeology, he was determining times of how long it would actually take to make Lord Dunmore's clothing. So one of the things that I've recently added to my future hypothesis is that last one, how many person hours does it take to make a meal? Oops, sorry, a meal from start to finish. And what I want to do is examine the, all the things that go into that. I have no idea how barley grows, like how long does it need, how much sun, I've seen pigs slaughtered, but it's been like, it's not something that I see every day. They didn't have a grocery store like I do, These are all things that go into this that I don't have experience with. So I need to do so I don't have a specific hypothesis. At this point, I was trying to figure out the differences, and I am unsure how to tease that out.
Yeah. One,
One of
one,
the things, go ahead.
I have a couple suggestions.
Yes, please.
One thing is, I really like the presentation, by the way. It's really a lot of fun. I'd love to try it myself. The first thing that just to give you a suggestion is do what you did here with the research questions, but frame them as potential research objectives. And what you're going to find is that some of them are impossible, although you would like to do it. I don't think you'll be able to figure out how many person hours it takes to make a meal, but that could be something you want to do, but it might not be part of the hypothesis. Just because I think it'll take you years to figure out how many person hours it takes to make a meal. Okay, maybe not years. But the other things you were talking about is this shape better than this? How far from the flame was something probably supposed to be? Which pots worked better? Things like that, I think would make great hypothesis statements. Or how does the charcoal different from the wood coals? So I would think as make a whole series of things and then say, well, this one is obviously going to take way too long to do, and then you just throw it into your future work section. And the second comment is it was a question: how did it taste? I was wondering if you tasted these. Were they tasty?
It was kind of bland. I actually, my first batch, I actually ended up adding some like Italian seasoning to, and then it was fabulous. I really liked it.
Yeah.
Um, this recipe didn't really have any herbs added to it. So that is, something I need to play with. I need to still investigate what herbs might have been available during that period in Hedeby. So All right. Honor,
Um,
you still have your hand up?
yeah, they wanted to say something else. Um, One factor in the burning on your pot
Yeah.
is that when I used to work with ceramic pots, I found that I had to stir like crazy or start the thing on low coals covered with ash at dawn and just let it cook until dark. Those were I only had those options in order not to have a burned mess. I burned many a mess.
Okay.
Hey, Honor, the other option is just throw a bunch of water in it and turn it into soup.
Well, yeah, and you could even eventually cook that down, although it will be much stickier if you do.
I wish my friend was here who does bread in pots.
And the herb list, if you grab the handout from the next class, which is the Anglo-Saxon food class, it has a list of herbs documented in Anglo-Saxon England, which is not had to be, but it'd be one place to start. And they may be importable. I don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I actually acquired Anne Hagen's book
Mm.
because I figured that might be a good companion to what I was doing. So
Yeah, what
thank
I
you.
did in that class is pull all the foods out of both Anne Hagen's books and put them in subject and alphabetical order, and then added a few others from Anathemas that are probably pretty correct.
Great. Awesome.
Oh,
Shoshona. Shoshona, you have your hand up?
sorry, I was trying to unmute. I was wondering, I couldn't tell from the picture what kind of briquettes you said that you used or charcoal. Was it was it
It
lump coal?
it was just commercial charcoal.
Like the
So
briquette
it,
kind?
pardon?
Like the briquette kind?
Yeah, yeah.
Kingsford or whatever.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
uh, another tip I got from Glenn was that you use the lump coal. I put a picture in the chat if you ever figure out how to go look at that. But look for lump charcoal because that's actual charcoal that's been made from like oak or other hardwoods. So you might try
Awesome.
that instead because that briquette stuff has yucky chemicals and stuff in it too. So you don't
Yeah,
really want that.
yeah. I'm unfortunately aware, but yes, thank you. I will look for that.
Your,
Uh,
your other option is to make your own charcoal. So as your fire's dying down, throw a bunch of wood on it and throw all the ash on top of that and just let it die down. You'll get a good hunk of charcoal out of that. And you can start playing with making that too, is another thing to do.
I appreciate that suggestion, but unfortunately, my hearth was right at my tree line, and I did not want to be that guy. So I appreciate that. Honor, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I have a friend who is a cook on a tall ship, and she
Wow.
says the wood from which your charcoal is made is massively important because there are charcoals that burn low and slow, and there are charcoals that are almost as fierce as flame.
You want hardwood.
Awesome. Writing that down as well. All right.
Okay, so we've got just under 10 minutes left before the next class is coming in. So any last questions?
I have one more.
Yes.
So at the beginning you were talking about the different kinds of um barley, and
Yes.
I was just at my Korean market and I didn't look real close, but I saw they had a whole bunch of barley. Did you happen to look in any of the Asian markets for the barley, or do you not have that in your area?
I live out in a little podunk town. I think we have a Wise market and we have a Giant Eagle. But yeah, everything in the grocery store except for the Goya. I've now found that the Goya is at least pearled. So yeah, it was easier for me to just order it on the from Amazon. So if I'm up in Altoona, maybe I can get some find an Asian market up there. That would be fabulous. Right.
I had to stop and take care of my sister who broke her knee last week, so I missed some bits. What kind of onions were you using? Do you know what varietal they were?
Yeah, I don't. They were just Vidalia style sweet onions.
Ah,
Um, I've been talking to people about finding like foraging ramps
yeah.
and learning how to do that and see if I have any in my local areas, which I don't know. So,
Well, what you said about blandness, the two things that made me think of was one, that the ham of the Dark Ages in general was so salty we would not consider it edible unless it were stewed. So it may have been more salty in period. But two, there is an onion in Europe that you cannot eat raw unless you've been trained to it from childhood because it's so strong a flavor. And that might have reduced the blandness too.
okay, good to know. All right. I just want to quick show you some references I used. And yeah, um, contact me if you want to, please, if you have further suggestions and comments and whatnot. I would very much appreciate it. So, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.